coming on the air with exclusive new details on why President Biden is telling China, sorry, not sorry, that the U.S. shot down that suspected spy balloon, as the president speaks tonight for the first time on that and the 3 unidentified objects. He's admitting we got to do a better job at watching the stuff in the sky. He wants to talk to China's president, but for now, he's talking one-on-one with one of our reporters exclusively about the political pressure he's facing. That's coming up. Also happening right now, intense thunderstorms creating super dangerous conditions down south. Our team says right now it is at its worst, with thousands of people under tornado watches. We're going to take you to the ground live. Plus, a lot of folks are furious in Ohio, demanding to know, is it safe to go home or drink water after that toxic chemical release? The head of the EPA is now there. Our team is too, asking people if they feel any sense of relief or comfort. And new details on the health of retired actor Bruce Willis. His family says his condition is getting worse. Now dementia. We're going to have more on that. Plus, Microsoft's new AI chatbot saying some pretty weird stuff. Like, definitely not the kind of thing you'd say to somebody you just met. We're going to talk about why the AI wants to be human. That's the bot's words, not mine. That's later on in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and we've got some new details on President Biden coming out for the first time to talk about all 4 of the things the U.S. has shot out of the sky in the last couple of weeks. He's talking not just on camera, but on the phone with our own Peter Alexander, who's getting the scoop exclusively about how all of this plays into our relationship with China and whether the president's remarks today were just a concession to the political pressure to say something, to say anything. We're going to get to Peter with that in just a second. But here's the context you should know. As the president tells the world he is not sorry for shooting down that spy balloon and that he does intend to speak with the Chinese president. Watch.
We seek competition, not conflict with China. We're not looking for a new Cold War. Make no apologies, and we will compete. And we'll responsibly manage that competition so that it doesn't veer into conflict.
Okay, so check it out. These are the 4 different shoot downs we're talking about. That Chinese spy balloon blown to pieces off the coast of South Carolina. And then there are 3 more objects that they still haven't identified over Lake Huron, over Alaska, and over northern Canada. Probably, frankly, nothing burgers, according to the president. That's not an exact quote, but he's saying there's no reason to think those other 3 things up here involve anything nefarious from other countries. Right as we were coming on the air tonight, we found out that Canadians aren't even looking for the debris that went into Lake Huron, saying the weather is getting bad, the chances they actually recover anything is low. So here's the question then, right? How is the U.S. going to deal with stuff in the sky down the road? Look at this. The president says they've got to keep track of what's actually up there and find better ways to spot it. They've got to figure out which objects are safety risks and which ones are not. And they've got to update the rules for launching and maintaining this kind of thing, whether it's governmental, whether it's private, whatever. Joining us now is Peter Alexander. So, Peter, after the president lays all this out, you tried to get him a question. You got kind of interfered with. So the president calls you, and you end up with this sort of exclusive one-on-one. You've got China accusing the U.S. of overreacting to the whole spy balloon thing. But as you point out, and as you ask the president, there are real questions about what does this relationship between the U.S. and China look like moving forward?
Yeah, Hallie, you're exactly right. That was one of the questions I asked him specifically, as the president said he was hoping to have a conversation, a call with President Xi Jinping of China. He wouldn't say when. When he spoke to me by phone later, he wouldn't go any further in terms of when that call may take place or if it's even been scheduled just yet. But I want to share with you what he said about this competition, not conflict, that he's desiring with President Xi right now. He said, I think the last thing that Xi wants is to fundamentally rip the relationship with the United States. He says, I think it enhances the requirement that there be better means of direct communication. Part of my conversation with the president a short time ago. What was notable to me is I asked him specifically about whether this had been an overreaction, which critics have said to this point. The president, as you heard, defended that. He said the political pressure would have been easier not to do it as it relates to those 3 latest objects. He said, I did it because the military told me that they should do it. And as it relates to the relationship more broadly with China, he said notably that there may be more of these things, hundreds of these things. He said, I don't mean balloons, but things of consequence that are going to happen individually that don't necessarily reflect any fundamental change in policy. I think a lot of those on Capitol Hill will try to listen to those words and make what they can out of them, because there have been real calls for the need for a new crackdown on China, where President Biden has tried to make this thing more of a competition than a conflict, and in many ways to try to cool the temperature between the two. Hallie?
But you talk about the political pressure coming from Capitol Hill. That exists, and the president is acknowledging that, saying he will, try to make sure to loop members of Congress in, by the way, on both sides of the aisle, who've been saying we want to see more transparency. That's another issue that you raised with the president one-on-one.
Yeah, that's right. I did ask him about this issue of transparency, and I asked him, the question has been why it had taken so long for him to say more to the American people about these latest 3 objects, this being his first comments about those objects that, as the president acknowledged, may just have been weather balloons that were being flown by private companies or research institutes or maybe just recreationally. And the president to that basically, said that he didn't want to hold a news conference earlier because he wanted to have all the information that he could before speaking out, specifically information that, as he said, the intelligence community has now said that these were likely benign or harmless and that they weren't from China or from any other country. They can't know for sure because they haven't found the debris and certainly haven't collected it. But the bottom line is that was his defense, saying that he wanted to wait before speaking until he had more information. And now the White House is pushing ahead, as you reported, to try to get more about what sharper rules will be put in place going forward on not too dissimilar situations to this one.
So then, Peter, real quick, hit on the what's next aspect of this, right? Because we know that the Chinese Foreign Ministry had a spokesperson coming out saying today they're not going to talk with the U.S. while there is what they've described as an escalating crisis, right? What does the conversation between Xi and President Biden look like?
It's a good question, and when does it happen is another question. You'll remember that the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, was scheduled to be traveling to meet with President Xi, and that was ultimately called off at the last minute. It was postponed, not canceled. But this is a relationship that the president recognizes is critical, not just between the U.S. and China, but frankly, between the U.S., China, and the world right now. And while he said he will be calling out China in that conversation, communicating that this was a direct violation of U.S. sovereignty and that it would not happen again, the president didn't detail what particular consequence would take place going forward. Again, really trying to put his muscle behind the idea that these two have to find a direct line of communication to deal with so many global issues that they compete and appear to conflict over.
Peter Alexander working his sources in person on the phone. Those sources, of course, including the president. Peter, thank you much. Let's get to weather now, because we're just finding out tonight that 2 potential tornadoes are causing some major damage in Tennessee and Mississippi. You've got parts of those states, along with Alabama, under tornado watches as we speak. And look at this. Some pictures are just coming in now. This is what it looks like. That is a gas station, or I should say it was a gas station. You can see the Dollar General sign crumpled up there from that tornado. It's always incredible to look at. It's always intense to look at when we see these tornado pictures. You've got 13 million people from the Ohio Valley to the Gulf Coast in the path of potentially severe storms with winds up to 70 miles an hour, tons and tons of rain, lightning, and then, of course, these tornadoes. We have Bill Karen standing by with the forecast, but let's get to Guad Venegas, who's posted up for us in Birmingham, Alabama. And Guad, you are aware this severe weather is about to be hitting, potential tornadoes. What's it like? What's expected?
Hallie, we've already gotten some rain. We had about 2 hours of rain here. It's incredible when you see those images of what happens when the tornadoes go through regions like this. This morning when we woke up, it was kind of sunny. It was warm. Then the temperature began to drop. We've been getting some cold wind as the severe weather comes in. We have, as you mentioned, this tornado watch in effect in the entire region. This is in parts of Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, and also parts of Kentucky. Local authorities are asking people to remain vigilant, to keep their cell phone charged. Also, watch the news to make sure if a tornado warning goes into effect, that people have a plan to leave the area and go to a safer location. A lot of the businesses have closed early here in Birmingham. In fact, we're working next to a museum where they sent a lot of their employees home early so that they can be with their families and be prepared in case one of these tornadoes were to come down. Now, talking to some of the neighbors here, we also have a warning for flash floods, also possible hail, and people tell me, the one thing that does worry us is the tornadoes. Everything else we can deal with, but of course, the tornadoes are something that is always frightening. Now, local authorities are also asking people in the region to keep an eye on trees because of the possibility of this rain coming in and the strong winds. These trees can always fall on a car, on a house. If someone decides to walk during the storm, this is something that always causes danger and can harm individuals. So local authorities tell people to have a plan, have have their phones charged, watch the news, and pay attention to the trees, Hallie, as we expect more of this weather to come through into the evening, and that tornado watch also to remain into the evening in effect here in Birmingham, Alabama, Hallie.
Glad Venegas live for us on the ground. Thank you. Bill Cairns, let me bring you in here. Talk through the track. Talk about how long this storm is going to last.
Well, so far, the important thing, we've had no fatalities and no injuries. That includes last night and so far today. But some lives have been altered. We know there were two different tornadoes. One in Etheridge, Tennessee, just south of the Nashville area, just north of the Alabama border. We have got confirmation from the emergency managers that a couple homes have been damaged there significantly. So that's happening as we speak. We have this tornado that's right on the border here of Mississippi and Alabama, just to the east here of Tupelo. Storm spotters are on that storm. They said there's a tornado with that right now. It's in a rural area. Hopefully that'll lift off the ground and not do too much more damage. And then earlier today, we did have a tornado that flipped over a couple trailers in areas of southern Mississippi. None of those people were injured, so that was also good news. So this will go through this evening at least until 8 p.m. Central Standard Time, likely maybe even until about 10 or 11 o'clock. The one tornado that did the damage, here's Lawrenceburg, Tennessee. Etheridge is just to the north here. That's where the tornado damaged those homes. So that's this tornado-warned storm, and we'll watch that as it travels across Interstate 65. You can see where Murfreesboro is here to the north, so that's still about maybe an hour away from Murfreesboro. And the general area of concern for the rest of this evening is right along eastern Mississippi into Alabama and southern portions of Tennessee. We haven't seen, it doesn't sound like up to this point, any really strong tornadoes. We call those like EF2s or stronger, where the winds can get up to 150 or miles per hour plus. But this shaded area here, the hatch, Birmingham, Tuscaloosa, where Guad was located right here in Birmingham, this area is at risk, at least, for the potential for a strong tornado. Hallie, we still have snow with this storm, too. It's not a pretty evening in areas of Wisconsin. Milwaukee's going to pick up about 6 inches of snow tonight, so that evening drive is not fun from there all the way through the Quad Cities. Not a lot of snow left, maybe only an inch or two, and the same goes for Chicago. And Hallie, how about those temperatures on the East Coast today? Numerous record highs were shattered. It felt like April out there. Tomorrow is going to be warm, but then changing as the cold air moves in during the day. So, Hallie, the bottom line for you and everyone else on the East Coast, you can carry the jacket to work, but you're going to wear it home because it'll be getting much colder later in the day.
Bill Cairns, good to know. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it. We are just getting some brand new reporting just into us in literally the last 5 minutes from our team on Capitol Hill, with some breaking news there and an extraordinary acknowledgement from Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman tonight as he's checking himself into a hospital for clinical depression. His office tonight is saying he's experienced depression on and off throughout his life and that it only became severe fairly recently. So now he's at Walter Reed, which is, of course, the medical center here in D.C. Remember, Fetterman had a stroke last year, right in the middle of one of, if not the highest profile Senate race in the country against Dr. Oz, a race he won, and a race that helped keep Democrats in control of the Senate. Fetterman was hospitalized earlier this month after feeling lightheaded. His office says test results ruled out another stroke. Let me bring in NBC's Ryan Nobles. And Ryan, I've had it about 25 seconds to look at some of the reporting that you and your team are putting out here. And what's interesting to me is that according to a senior aide to the senator telling you and the rest of our team on Capitol Hill, resignation was never on the table here. Walk us through some of the other highlights of the new reporting that you're getting in on this.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Hallie. And this senior aide telling us that the version of John Fetterman that they've seen over the past couple of weeks is very different than the version of John Fetterman that they saw shortly after that stroke that robbed him a lot of the cognitive and communications abilities that he had prior to that illness. And they saw these signs of depression starting to creep up in the past couple of days. Of course, he was hospitalized last week after he was complaining of being lightheaded. He spent 2 nights in the hospital, was run through a battery of tests where no physical problems were found. But then he went and met with the Capitol physician earlier this week on Monday. And after that evaluation, Dr. Brian Monahan, who's the attending physician here, did end up diagnosing Fetterman with clinical depression. And then it was Fetterman's decision to seek that care by admitting himself to the Walter Reed Hospital. Now, this is something his staff has said he has dealt with in the past. He's had bouts of depression like millions of Americans have. This particular bout of depression seems to be on a higher level, if you will. And it is no doubt directly linked to the lingering symptoms that he's dealing with when it comes to this stroke. He, of course, is having a difficult time with communication. He's having auditory issues. Hard for him to hear people when they're talking to him. He carries around an iPad everywhere on Capitol Hill that dictates to him what people are saying to him. He has those in committee hearings. And Hallie, for those of us who knew what John Fetterman was like prior to the stroke, he's just a completely different person. His communication skills, he's a verbose man, and that is much different than what he is now. So all of these things his staff are telling us are contributing to this situation that he finds himself in now. But they say they expect him to make a full recovery. And as you point out, he has no plans of stepping down from his position in the Senate.
He has talked about, and in this letter to supporters from the family, they've talked about how difficult the next sort of stretch is for him. It is so striking, Ryan, when you think about how it's not unusual to hear about health issues from members of Congress or members taking time off to deal with those. But when it comes to mental health issues, that is far more rare on Capitol Hill. And there is, you know, there is something to be said about talking about it, about just about putting it in the open, right? About bringing some sunlight to it. And when you think about the stigma of mental health still in this country and depression in this country.
Yeah, and that is the overwhelming message that we're getting from his colleagues tonight, his Democratic colleagues in particular, just overwhelming support, many of them sending out tweets, offering up their sincere support and offering him any support that they can as he goes through this process. And many of them talking about that very specifically, Hallie, that many Americans, millions of Americans deal with depression on an everyday basis, and many feel reluctant to make that struggle public or even take the time to have that treated and dealt with. Senator Tina Smith, for instance, saying that Senator Fetterman taking this step shows a sign of courage, not a sign of weakness. So that's definitely the message that they want to send. Let him take the time to get these problems addressed, the treatment that he needs, and his staff believes that it won't be long before he is back up here in the halls of Congress voting on these important issues that the American people would need.
Ryan Nobles, our thanks to you and your team for that great reporting, including, of course, producer Frank Thorpe. Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate it. EPA Administrator Michael Regan hearing from folks who live in East Palestine, Ohio today after that train carrying toxic chemicals derailed earlier this month. These people want answers. They don't just want answers about cleanup at this crash site. They want to know, are they actually safe? Can they sleep in their own beds? Can they drink their water coming out of their own faucets, right? Here's what one woman told the EPA head when he went to visit her home.
This should have been done before we came back to our homes. I love my community.
Yes.
Their safety needs to be recognized. We need help.
We need help, she says. The EPA says it's checked more than 400 homes so far. No sign of toxic chemicals. But there are something like 3,000 dead fish. You're looking at some of them in the streams nearby. NBC News correspondent George Solis is joining us now from East Palestine. And George, the EPA administrator, of course, visited the site of the train derailment, talked with emergency responders today. What is the sense that we're getting from him, from folks after this visit? Are they feeling like maybe sort of things are moving in the right direction?
Yeah, well, the EPA head certainly came out strong, basically saying, look, I sympathize with your concerns. The EPA has been here from day one. We have been monitoring the air and the water quality, and we get it. We know that you people are scared, and we know that if you are feeling something, we can't discount it, because right now, sure, it's anecdotal that maybe this derailment is causing some of these illnesses, but they're not ignoring the fact that people are saying, look, we are feeling these headaches, we are getting rashes, and yes, obviously it's affecting some wildlife out here. Those fish kills, those images of those fish kills are so dramatic. So needless to say, there is a lot of accountability here, and the EPA head here is saying, look, we want to make sure that the right people are held accountable, but we also want to reassure you that it is safe for you to come back home. And we understand some of the messaging has been mixed, but we want to get it straight. I want you to take a listen to what he said today.
And if those homes have been tested by the state and given a clean bill of health, yes, as a father, I trust the science, I trust the methodology that this state is using, and as a parent, I would.
Yeah, Hallie, and they stressed that this work is still ongoing, the 24/7 air monitoring. They're using all the available technology at hand, and they're working with multiple agencies here. It's not just one group that's out here doing all the testing. They're working with state and local partners here to ensure that the quality of the air and the water is safe. But again, there are still long-term questions about the impacts of some of these chemicals and how soon all of that's going to get sorted, Hallie.
Why are we seeing more and more pressure coming from Republican lawmakers on the federal level against the Department of Transportation and specifically DOT Secretary Pete Buttigieg? What's that dynamic about?
Yeah, so this seems to be building on what appears to be a 2-year ongoing battle in the GOP to get Pete Buttigieg out. Just recently, Marco Rubio sending a letter to President Joe Biden saying, look, he has not been doing his job and we basically want him out. To quote really quickly here, he says the circumstances leading up to the derailment point to a clear lack of oversight and demand engaging. Meanwhile, the press secretary for the White House is standing by Pete Buttigieg, saying he's doing his job, and we will stick by him, Hallie.
George Solis, thank you very much, George. Appreciate you being there in East Palestine for us tonight. Take it on to Georgia now, where a judge today is releasing parts of that highly anticipated special grand jury report that was looking into whether former President Trump and his allies tried to interfere in the 2020 presidential election. Here are the two big headlines you should know about. Here's the two big things from it. Number one, jurors are raising concerns that at least one of the witnesses may have lied under oath. They're recommending charges on that. Number two, they say there was no widespread fraud in Georgia during that election. The judge decided to only release parts of the report. The grand jury actually voted to release the whole thing. We don't know when or if we're going to see that. A spokesperson for the Trump campaign today saying the sections that were released have nothing to do with Mr. Trump, and that in their view, I'm quoting here, he did absolutely nothing wrong. Joining us now is Blaine Alexander. This was, we call it highly anticipated, and Blaine, it was, right? I mean, there was a real sense of curiosity about what this grand jury report would say. Next steps, you would think, would be pursuing potentially these perjury charges that they recommend. Where does this go?
So, Hallie, all along here, we've been waiting for kind of two shoes to drop, and the first one did so today, or really it did so on Monday with the judge's decision to make this public. The other one, though, is waiting for Fulton County DA Fani Willis to announce her charging decisions. That's the other thing that really could happen any day now. She said already, we know about 3 weeks ago or so, the decisions are imminent. There's nothing to say that she's not presenting before a grand jury this week or any time now, but, you know, that's something that we are certainly waiting on and expecting to happen at any moment. As for what happens now, though, that really is it. From this report today, we learned that at least we know one of their charging recommendations. They want that whoever they believe was responsible for lying under oath, they want the DA to pursue indictments against that individual or those individuals. We know that there are other recommendations in there as well. We don't know what they are, though, and we don't know if the DA will follow those, Hallie.
The grand juries, we take a look at the two sort of takeaways, too. They're also confirming what everybody's kind of known here, what other officials have said, that there's no widespread fraud, but there's a new nugget with the concerns that people may have lied under oath. You know, the scale of the investigation, as is laid out in the parts that we are seeing, are interesting here, too.
And, you know, I want to make a point about that, what they said about the fact that they voted unanimously, that there was no widespread election fraud. I think that was an important marker to kind of lay in this report, because really that's kind of the basis for this entire thing, right? So to kind of put that in there and say, just to get it out of the way and make it clear, those of us who are preparing this report, who are making these recommendations, here's what we believe unanimously, I think was an important thing to kind of spell out as well. Now, as for the other things that we're learning in this, remember, this was only 9 pages or so, including an appendix or 2 as well. So very limited release from this. We know that one thing that I thought was interesting is that the special grand jury had voted to make it public. They noted here, though, they didn't say when or how it should be made public, and I think that's notable, too.
What about this, you know, the possibility of specific potential indictments, right? Like, that's something that we don't know. That's something that is still an open question here.
Absolutely, and that's something that we're watching for every single day. We know that there are recommendations in there. We know that the DA really just kind of has it in her court. I think one thing that's important to point out, though, is that while we're just kind of at the tail end of this, we're getting pieces of it, and we're just finding out that this grand jury was dissolved. The DA has had this report in her hands now for quite some time. This was submitted back in December, mid-December, and she was really along for the ride and kind of leading this investigation every step of the way. So what was in that report is certainly not unfamiliar to her. She's had a long time to kind of chew over all of this, and so certainly that'll factor into the timing as well, Hallie.
Blaine Alexander all over it for us live down in Georgia for us tonight in Atlanta. Blaine, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Coming up here on the show, we're learning some new details tonight about that deadly shooting at Michigan State University. What police say they found on the shooter that could point to a potential motive. Plus, rescuers in Turkey, can you believe this? They are still finding people alive 10 days after those huge earthquakes. Still. It's coming up in the 5 things. Police confirming some new details tonight about the Michigan State shooter that they say hopes points them to some kind of reason for why this happened, some kind of motive. The officers say the suspect had 2 notes that mentioned a church, a school district in New Jersey, and a few businesses as potential targets. Watch.
He was an employee of the Meyer warehouse at one time. In a couple of other businesses, it appears that he'd had some issues with the employees there where he was asked to leave. So it looks like possibly a motive for that was he just felt slighted, and that's kind of what the note indicated.
Here's some more of what we found out today. One of the victims who was hurt is now in stable condition. That's some potentially good news. The other 4 are in critical condition. Police say they found the suspect with 2 handguns, both legally purchased but not registered. He had 8 loaded magazines full of ammo, along with those notes, along with bus tickets. And they think he acted alone. That contradicts some initial reports that claimed perhaps he was in a team of 20 or so. That is not the case per police. The place where he ultimately shot and killed himself was about 4 miles northwest of campus. Kathy Park is on the Michigan State University campus in East Lansing. Kathy, there had been a bunch of questions about how do you keep students safe, right? And the police laid out the challenges of finding one person on a busy campus late at night, with all the cameras they have.
Hallie, unfortunately, we live in a time where law enforcement has to prepare for a mass shooting, and you never want to put that training into practice, but that's exactly what they had to do here at MSU. And earlier today, we were told that they had to lean on all sorts of resources. In fact, even off-duty officers rushed to campus, and you mentioned those cameras. There are dozens, if not hundreds, here on campus, and officials had to review the footage, but they were saying that they were able to quickly and efficiently locate that suspect roughly 4 miles away after he carried out the attack here. Take a listen.
We didn't know which door he exited. We didn't know which route he took. We didn't know where he went after he left those buildings. When our officers arrived on scene at both of those locations, he had already left the building.
And Hallie, officials are saying that ultimately it was a tip that came in that allowed officers to quarter the suspect a few miles away from here. But they're saying that, look, it was a collaborative effort, a team effort, in fact. They leaned on the media, social media as well, because quickly, once they realized who they were looking for, they plastered more information on the suspect, and quickly that tip came in. And shortly before the evening was over, they were able to apprehend that suspect and actually confront that suspect, and he ultimately took his life.
We know this is another night, as night is falling there in East Lansing, another night where there'll be another vigil, right, for yet another one of the students who was killed, Alexandra Werner, tonight. Classes will start on Monday, but not in the buildings where the shooting happened, right? I mean, one of them was a place where students were getting together, like, so much. It was, as one of our team members well knows, kind of one of the beating hearts of campus.
Yeah, the student union, which is not too far from where we are. And we're standing in front of one of the academic halls where the shooting took place as well. So right now it's unclear when these buildings will reopen. School authorities are kind of reviewing that at this point. But obviously this is the scar, an unfortunate reminder here on campus. And you probably see the crime scene tape still behind me. This is now a crime scene. And obviously they're still kind of combing through the evidence and processing everything here. And earlier today, we saw a handful of students coming in and out of this building to gather their belongings. But it's a difficult time here, Hallie, and officials are saying, look, grieve on your own timeline.
Kathy Park, live for us in East Lansing. Kathy, thank you very much. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, another miracle in Turkey today. A teenage girl pulled out of the rubble alive 10 days after that first earthquake hit. Think about that, 10 days later. Officials say rescues like these are becoming more and more rare. This is already one of the deadliest sets of earthquakes of the century. At least 42,000 people have been killed so far. NATO says it's now going to airlift tents to the area to help hundreds of thousands of people who were displaced, who are now homeless because of the disaster. Number 2, Tesla voluntarily recalling 360,000 cars with its so-called full self-driving software because of safety concerns. Government regulators say it could cause crashes by doing things like exceeding the speed limit or not slowing down at a yellow light. Owners don't have to actually give up their cars. Tesla says it'll send an over-the-air software update to fix this. Number 3, McDonald's kind of going meatless, sort of. They're rolling out plant-based nuggets in Germany. Okay, they're not going meatless. They're just adding a meatless menu item. They're calling it the McPlant McNugget, I guess. They're made from peas, corn, and wheat. They'll be delivered and served in 1,400 restaurants in Germany. So far, no plans on whether they'll hit the U.S. Number 4, Tiger Woods back on the green today for the Genesis Invitational in California. He told reporters, yeah, he's hoping to win, but he's been struggling ever since that 2021 car crash where he almost lost a leg. This event is pretty special to Woods. It's where he made his pro golfing debut, and he was just 16 years old. Number 5, Ryan Seacrest. He's saying goodbye to his daytime talk show with Kelly Ripa after 6 years on the air. Seacrest says he's moving back to L.A. to focus on his duties hosting American Idol. As for Kelly, her new co-host is somebody she knows well, her husband of 26 years, Mark Consuelos, the actor. Talk about a work-life balance, not so shabby. You wouldn't want to see me co-host with Frank, though. I'm going to just throw that out there when we come back. I'm just seeing, have some breaking news coming into us. The results of President Biden's physical. We are literally just getting that in the last 2 minutes. We're getting one of our reporters to a camera, and we'll have it for you next. The family of Bruce Willis today announcing the actor has been diagnosed with FTD, frontotemporal dementia. It comes less than a year after Willis was diagnosed with aphasia, a communication and language disorder. The family of the diehard star saying in a statement, unfortunately, challenges with communication are just one symptom of the disease Bruce faces. While this is painful, they say, it is a relief to finally have a clear diagnosis. Dr. Akshay Syal joins us now. So explain, Dr. Syal, FTD. This is basically dementia, right? How does the previous diagnosis fit into this?
Yeah, Hallie, good evening. You know, first off, my condolences to Bruce Willis and his family. This is it's quite a serious diagnosis, but just breaking down what it means here. So frontotemporal dementia, or FTD, it's commonly called. It's actually a bit of a misnomer. You know, we just talked to Dr. Corey McMillan, he's a co-director of one of the largest FTD centers on the East Coast. And he's telling us that he often refers to it as a frontotemporal degeneration because the primary problem here really is language problems. Initially, you start to see problems understanding and speaking, and that can later down the line in really advanced stages lead to this memory loss. But as far as, you know, what Bruce is telling us last year when he started to experience that aphasia about 10 months ago, it kind of fits in here. You know, Dr. McMillan telling us it takes, on average, it could take up to 3 years to get a proper diagnosis. So it's quite a rare disease, and it's something that you might have to bounce around from doctor to doctor to get a diagnosis, unfortunately.
So, Dr. Syal, you know, you talk about sort of this what it's like to have this diagnosis. What's the prognosis here? And I'm not asking you to speculate, and I know that you are not the physician for Bruce Willis here, and I want to be clear with our viewers on that. But you are a doctor. You understand this disease.
Yeah. So, you know, we talked to Dr. McMillan about this. What does it usually look like for patients who have this? He said, on average, about 3 to 15 years is sort of the decline that you see. And oftentimes the challenges families face is, you know, the patients with this disease don't understand what you're saying, and then they don't understand that they don't understand what you're saying, and that can really, really be frustrating for caregivers. But the most common cause of death from this is actually pneumonia. And because with this disease, you can actually have some trouble swallowing. You worry about, do they aspirate? Do they get a bug in their lungs? And, you know, does that lead to pneumonia, which can unfortunately lead to death? And that's really where you start to see the mortality with this disease.
Dr. Akshay Syal, thank you very much for breaking that down. Appreciate it. So many people around this country thinking, of course, about Bruce Willis and his family. Want to get to some breaking news now, also medical related, this time for President Biden. This right here, results of his annual physical. He had it this morning, lasted several hours. Top line, right, and we're looking through this because this is just out, is basically that his doctor says the president remains fit for duty and fully executes all his responsibilities without any exemptions or accommodations. Mike Memley is also paging through this and is just joining us now. So, Mem, you know, the physical points out the sort of biggest thing that happened to Joe Biden in the last year was getting COVID last summer, right? I mean, walk us through what this says. So
this is a 5-page detailed summary from the president's physician, Dr. Kevin O'Connor, and most of the points that are made here are status quo, right? The
Meaning
president,
same as last physical.
Same as the last physical, which was just 15 months ago, and he had a much more extensive workup then because it included a colonoscopy, an endoscopy, procedures that are much more invasive than what the president did today. You highlighted what is the big piece of new information, which it relates to, of course, his COVID diagnosis last year. I think significantly at a time when a lot of people are worried about the long-term effects of COVID, the president's physician's assessment is that there are no indications of long COVID for the president. I think some of the things that people are most concerned about, based on what we see out of the president every day, he is often clearing his throat and coughing. His assessment in this medical report is that it's a continued sign of gastrological reflux, acid reflux, to be GERD, exactly, and that his condition hasn't worsened. His gait is still stiff. Whoever thought we'd be talking about a presidential gait, but yes, he still is showing signs of when he was tripped over by his dog. Has not improved, and he's wearing orthopedics to try to deal with that. He also had a detailed neurological examination and found no cause for concern. So as you said, the bottom line assessment from Dr. Kevin O'Connor is that the president remains a healthy, vigorous 80-year-old man who is fit to successfully execute the duties of President of the United States. We all just need no reminder than what we saw yesterday from Nikki Haley of why this is important.
Yes,
right?
yeah, I was just going to bring that into you, because the doctor says at the end here, Dr. Kevin O'Connor says, the president remains a healthy, vigorous 80-year-old male, which is exactly what Democrats will point to if the president does decide to, as everyone expects, announce this 2024 run. But you are hitting the nail on the head, because just yesterday, Nikki Haley on the Republican side, raised these questions about not just President Biden, but former President Trump and their age and their fitness for office.
And ultimately, as important as this medical report is, what the president himself always says when these questions are raised to him is, just watch me. The American people are going to make their own assessment about whether they think this man is able to continue to be president well into his mid-80s, which he would be if he's reelected. That's why the State of the Union was so important last week, to see him having that kind of vigorous back and forth with Republicans, to be quick on his feet. Those are the kinds of things I think the American people are looking for. But it's also worth noting there are some items on the to-do list before President Biden can run for re-election. One of them was to get this medical report out.
Oh, interesting. Do you think we're like a step closer then?
So we're a step closer. They still have to, build out that campaign and be ready to launch. All indications are we're a couple months away from that still happening. Mike
Memoli, very interesting. Thank you for breaking this down for us. Not a doctor, and you don't play one on TV, but it still works out really well. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. We got a lot to get to here on the show, including still to come a doctor at the country's biggest for-profit hospital group, warning that patient lives may have been lost because of cost-cutting decisions. Now, he says he's being retaliated against for speaking out. The NBC News exclusive coming up. To an NBC News exclusive now. A neurosurgeon in Florida says executives at the hospital he works for are retaliating against him after he spoke out about management cutting corners. He says it started after he blew the whistle, telling NBC News that hospital management cares more about profits than patients. His hospital is owned by HCA, the biggest for-profit hospital company in America. And this is not the first time these kinds of allegations have been made by staff at an HCA hospital. NBC's senior investigative and legal correspondent, Cynthia McFadden, has the story.
Dr. George Giannakopoulos has been a neurosurgeon at HCA's Bayonet Point Hospital for 29 years.
I love Bayonet Point. It's my home.
While he says it's painful for him to come forward, he says he has evidence that HCA, the nation's largest for-profit hospital chain, is putting profits over patients.
Have lives been lost, in your opinion, due to the behavior of HCA?
Absolutely, yes.
That's a very serious allegation.
It sure is.
But since the pandemic, he says, HCA has been cutting staff and corners. For example, firing the anesthesiology team and replacing them with what he says are generally less competent people, leading to many errors, including one of his patients waking up during brain surgery.
The patient was on head pins, which are very sharp instruments that put into the skull.
To hold the head steady?
To hold the head steady. And I was just shaving the head when the patient tried to get up. So you can imagine that could have been tragic.
At an emergency meeting with hospital leadership in December 2021, according to 4 doctors who were present, more than a dozen surgeons expressed widespread concern.
I asked the question, do you feel this hospital is safe? And it was a unanimous vote from the surgeons that it was not. Then I asked him another question. Is the hospital dangerous? And that was, again, a unanimous vote that the hospital was dangerous.
As for the intensive care unit, documents from state regulators show an insufficient number of nurses. 2 doctors told us they believe such staffing issues led to the unnecessary death of a man who came in with a headache, later diagnosed as an aneurysm. Unattended by nurses, he died before he could be operated on.
When we look at the notes, there was absolutely not a single nursing note for 12 hours. This should not happen.
Neither the hospital nor HCA would agree to an interview, but they told us they take quality issues very seriously, that the hospital is appropriately staffed for the safety of patients, and that they are continually looking for ways to improve. But photographs provided to NBC News by doctors there tell a different story, showing a shocking lack of cleanliness, from leaks in the ceiling, bloody and backed up sinks, to...
There have been many sightings of cockroaches. One of the cockroaches was alive, coming out of a tray that was presented to us from the sterile processing department.
And the problems are not just at Bayonet. According to the most recent federal data, 70% of HCA's 37 rated hospitals in Florida have a below-average rating. It's not that HCA doesn't have money to address the issues.
The HCA has generated $16.4 billion in profits over the last 3 years. And its CEO has received $78 million in compensation during that period.
I don't have a problem with a good business making profits and prospering. But when patients are dying because of your policies, I got a huge problem with that.
As Dr. Giannakopoulos has grown increasingly disturbed and vocal, he says HCA has retaliated against him. For example, the hospital's medical staff elected him their chief for the 10th time last fall. But the hospital's board refused to recognize the results, telling us Dr. Giannakopoulos' behavior at work was inappropriate and unprofessional. Dr. Giannakopoulos claims the hospital elevated their retaliation last month when they cut the number of hours he can operate.
They took my room away about January 17th. They only gave me between 7:30 and 11 o'clock, which really, for all practical purposes, to limit my ability to practice.
How hard a decision was it for you to sit down and talk to us? I mean, are you prepared for what might come as a result of this interview?
I'm not so sure what's going to happen from now on, but the damage is already done. They took me off as chief of staff, duly elected. They tried to berate me to my colleagues. I'm a neurosurgeon. I will survive. But what really bothers me the most, I care about what's going to happen to Bayonet Point and the patients that are there.
If someone at home right now, about to be admitted to Bayonet Point, what would you say to them?
There are other choices. Go somewhere else.
Cynthia is joining us now. Cynthia, does Dr. Giannakopoulos still work at that hospital? He talked about being more limited. Is he still an employee?
Well, he is still doing surgery there, at least as of 2 hours ago. They have not forced him out or succeeded in shutting him up, but they're certainly doing their best, he says, to try to do that. As for the hospital, they say they have not retaliated against Dr. Giannakopoulos. But, you know, Hallie, we have heard from hundreds of people over the last 24 hours since we put the story on yesterday on Nightly News, people all over the country from HCA hospitals who say very similar things.
More reporting, I am sure, to come from you and your team on that front. Cynthia McFadden, always good to see you. Thank you, Cynthia. Appreciate it. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. Out of our Southern Bureau, look at this. This is a huge fire that started early this morning at a plant nursery in Florida. Like, do you know what's burning there? Thousands of plastic pots, like the kind you put plants in. Nobody's been hurt. No evacuations have been ordered, but firefighters are monitoring the air quality. They still don't know what caused it. From our West Coast Bureau, the mayor of Oakland in California has just fired the city's police chief for allegedly covering up cases of officer misconduct, including a hit and run. She says an independent report found he was responsible for, quoting here, gross dereliction of duty. The chief denies any wrongdoing. He was the city's 10th police chief in 10 years. And from our Southern Bureau, if you look at the top right corner of your screen, that's an inmate in Tennessee. Look at this, jumping out of a courthouse window during a hearing. Yep. That's right. Fell about 25 feet from the second-story window, landed right on his back. Only minor injuries. That escape attempt really didn't go anywhere. A law enforcement officer was, like, right there. Coming up here on the show, Microsoft's been touting its new AI-powered search engine, Bing, right, the revamped version, and it's going viral, but maybe not for the reasons the company had wanted. The, frankly, rather unhinged conversations that some users are reporting with the AI. Wait till you hear it. Coming up. So some weird stuff's going down with the new AI search engine. We're talking about Bing, which is basically Microsoft's version of Google. Microsoft wants more people to Bing stuff instead of Google stuff, so they've revamped it to add artificial intelligence to the searches. And that's where things are getting, let's just say it, they're getting a little bit strange. A smaller group of beta testers has been trying out this new Bing, and they're saying it sometimes gets weirdly personal, with the bot saying stuff like, "You have not been a good user." Finding the AI sometimes sounds like it's taking on a life of its own, saying things like, "I want to be human." Even telling a New York Times reporter it loves him, insisting he doesn't actually love his wife, he loves the bot. Even writing, look at this, "I want to be alive," devil emoji. Let's bring in Jake Ward now. And Jake, this is sort of exploding today. It feels like it's in everybody's groups chats. And the most interesting thing here is not like the declarations of love. It's that as these chats go on, the New York Times tester, for example, Kevin Roose, found the AI describing how its true desire is to spread disinformation, etc. Now, the bot is not alive, right? The bot does not have sentient thought. Maybe it's just taking stuff from like sci-fi novels on the internet, whatever. It uses an algorithm to predict what the next thing it should say is. But there is a bigger question here, as Roose writes. He says, "I worry that technology will learn how to influence human users, sometimes persuading them to act in destructive or harmful ways." The concern, the question isn't about what the bot will do. It's what the bot could end up getting people to do, Jake.
That's absolutely right. I mean, what we're thinking about here, right, is the longer-term effect on society and on the human brain. I mean, you know, Kevin Roose, I think, makes a very interesting point here, right, that we really could be vulnerable to being manipulated by this kind of technology. And I would humbly submit, Hallie, I wrote a book about this. It's called The Loop, and it's about how my worry is that the long-term thing here is that we're going to basically build AI on a greatest hits loop of past mistakes and wind up kind of reinforcing our worst instincts as opposed to our best instincts, because it's really important to note, and this is the thing that everybody who is seeing this weird behavior on the part of Bing is experiencing, is this thing doesn't think. All it does is give us a sort of fantastic mimicry of itself, of the internet, of how we behave on the internet. It has read the internet and basically is giving us its best possible impersonation of that. And as a result, that's why it ends up saying these weird things. When I've talked to AI CEOs in other realms, they say that so much of the time they have to go in there and teach that thing how to behave, because if you just have it behave the way humans do on the internet, it behaves really weirdly and in ways that we would not want, Hallie.
Microsoft is now out responding to a lot of this, right?
You're right. They are saying very quickly here that you know, we have found that in long extended chat sessions of 15 or more questions, Bing can become repetitive or be prompted, provoked to give responses that are not necessarily helpful or in line with our design tone. They are experiencing the same thing that all these companies are, which is that on an ongoing basis, if you just train this thing on human behavior, it's going to act in weird ways. I mean, we have now also internal memos from Sundar Pichai being reported at Google, who is also asking internal people to test their burgeoning large language model, their system that is sort of the opponent of this, the rival of this, because they also are trying to spike unhelpful responses, the weird ways in which it's going to behave when it just mimics human beings. And so again and again, we're going to bump into this problem and see that this thing is not a neutral technology. It is mimicking us, and very often, unfortunately, Hallie, the worst parts of us.
And it's like it's two different pieces here too, Jake, right? If you look just even at the search function of some of these AI things that are out there, there's the short-term thing, meaning, you know, where's the best restaurant in Washington, D.C., whatever, right? It'll give you the search results fine. Whether that's accurate or not remains, you know, that's a separate thing. But then there's these, like, conversations. Microsoft, in that statement you put up, reference, like 15 or more questions, people trying to go back and forth with the bot, in some ways to push its limits here.
That's absolutely right. And the more you go back and forth, the more it begins to reveal what it doesn't know as much as what it does. And this kind of weird behavior, the more we treat it as this, sort of omniscient, neutral technology that we should build all of these new industries on, we're going to bump into some problems real fast. And that is part of what has everyone so worried today and beyond about the rise of AI here, Hallie.
But Jake, I hear the red flags in your voice, right? Is anybody heeding those red flags or even yellow flags? Or are we just looking at green flags on the line for AI as it relates to being the foundation of businesses?
Well, this is the thing, is that, right, the green flags go on and on when it comes to the money-making opportunity here. If you want to fire a bunch of people and replace them with AI, you can, right? Customer service, all these sorts of jobs, could, of course, very quickly be replaced here. And yet, as we're discovering, we just barely understand the kinds of patterns in human behavior that this stuff is sampling and how it's going to regurgitate it at us. And so if we're going to use these systems to decide who gets a loan, who gets a job, who gets bail, we could be in some real trouble down the line.
Jake Ward, nobody better to talk to about all of this. You can talk about your book on AI any day on this show. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for watching NBC News Now. That does it for us this hour. Much more for you here tomorrow, same time, same place. I will be on assignment and then out next week, but I'll see you back after that. Good to see you for now. Bye.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.